Hello, everyone, and welcome to the movie show. I'm your host, Tyler Calkins, and today we're going to be doing a review for The Two Popes. This is the Netflix movie starring Anthony Hopkins and Jonathan Pryce, playing, just as you guessed it, two popes. I'm going to start with some non-spoiler stuff, and then maybe we'll dive into a little bit of spoilery stuff at the end, and I'll definitely warn everybody when that happens, so that way if you haven't seen the movie, you can just check right out and then, come back after you watch it. And it's on Netflix, so anybody can watch this if they please. I will open it with this. It's a movie called The Two Popes, so it's going to be about religion, and unfortunately because religion kind of has political aspects of it, it's kind of political as well. So if politics and religion kind of aren't your thing, and for some people it's not, I don't know if this movie's going to work for you, okay? Because it is very much about, it is very, very theological. It is very much about religion. But at the same time, it does have some political aspects to it. So if that is not kind of your thing, you might need to check out on this. That said, though, this film is completely carried by the phenomenal performances from Anthony Hopkins and Jonathan Pryce. I almost feel like it's unfortunate that Jonathan Pryce is in the Best Actor category this year, because that is obviously going to go to Joaquin Phoenix for the Joker. But Jonathan Pryce does such a phenomenal job. I want him in supporting to win, even though he's totally not the supporting role. Jonathan Pryce is the lead character as Pope Francis in this movie. He does a really great job of conveying the earnestness and the well-meaningness of Pope Francis, at least that we get to see in the public persona and what we hear about Pope Francis in the private realms of things that we've heard about that Pope. So he really does a good job of conveying that warmth, conveying that care for regular, citizens. And that's not to say that Pope Benedict didn't care for regular citizens. I'm not trying to say that. I'm just saying that there is a difference there. And I think not only do you notice it as a viewer of the film, but at the same time, I think the world kind of noticed that when the popes changed. And that's just as somebody, and I'm not deeply religious in any means. I do have faith, but I'm not very religious. But that said, I think the world kind of felt that when that changed over. This movie really is propelled by their performances. Jonathan Pryce does a great job, and Anthony Hopkins does a great job of Pope Benedict. He plays it almost with a snark to some extent, this is where we are, and this is the old guard, and this is how it should be, and there's a level of respect for that to some extent, where you understand where people, they're like, we have rules for a reason, is kind of the idea, right? So that's where people who are more conservative, or at least his perspective on this religious wise more conservative, he's like, why do we have these rules anyway if we're just going to say let's forget about them because the world has changed? And I think that's an understandable point to make, I think, for some people who think deeply of their faith. Ultimately, just really great performances by them, and they are worthy of the Oscars that they are nominated for this year. I love the fact that this movie does a great job of kind of explaining old world and new world kind of Christianity and Catholicism and the Vatican and the papacy and all that kind of stuff. I think it does a really good job of kind of showing that in the modern era. I understand, though, why this film maybe wasn't nominated for Best Picture. I think that kind of makes sense. They had some room. I think they should have picked maybe a couple other movies, but I understand why this movie didn't get there, just because to me, it's more the scenes between Anthony Hopkins and Jonathan Pryce, and then not so much in any way, the rest of the film. But really, most of the film is them anyway, so it does carry it through. But again, I understand why it didn't get nominated for Best Picture. It still is a good film, and I think you should watch it, but those are reasons why I understand why it didn't get there. But obviously, the two actors get nominated as they should, because when they're bouncing off each other, it's phenomenal. It's almost, it reminds me of that great scene in Steve Jobs between Jeff Daniels and Michael Fassbender, and those two are some of the best actors that we have working. It's just phenomenal. So to see these two actors kind of playing off each other and bouncing off each other is just really, really phenomenal stuff. You get this great story of background for Pope Francis that kind of gives you why he is who he is and how he's gotten to where he's gotten to, and I think that's really great stuff. You don't get as much backstory for Pope Benedict, and I think that's unfortunate, because I think this movie kind of portrays him as a villain. It does bring him around to hey, he's human, he has flaws as well, but he's human. But at the same time, I feel like maybe the villainy role of him maybe wasn't the best. It's not like he's full-on villain, but I want to be clear, but it's just they kind of portray him to be more the negative guy, and then like Pope Francis to be the positive guy, and I don't know if that's necessarily a fair depiction overall. That said, I'm going to dive into a little bit of spoilers now. So if you have not seen the film, I suggest you go on Netflix. I'm pretty sure everybody has Netflix, or they're borrowing somebody's password. So why don't you go ahead and get onto Netflix and watch this movie, and then come back and we can finish then. What I found really cool about this movie is that it does give you some story about. Well, it's interesting because at first Pope Benedict doesn't like Pope Francis, and he thinks he's too progressive, and he thinks he's you're trying to push the church in ways that it isn't really fair, and you don't even believe in the church. You say these things like a couple of words don't make pedophile priests good people, and Pope Benedict is mad by that because he's like, oh, you think it's just a couple words, like that all you think of religion and the gospel and communion and all that kind of stuff. So I found that very fascinating, and I understood the dynamic between the two, where they were fighting to try to he's fighting for the old world, and Benedict and Francis is fighting for the new world. Like, hey, I understand that we don't want these rules. Why do we have these rules in the first place if we're just going to change them because the world changed? But I understand where Francis is over here saying, if you don't change the rules, the church is going to die. And if we don't kind of understand the world as it is, and work Christianity into the world as it is, we're not going to be able to do the good works that we want to do. And that kind of parlays off of something that happens midway through the film, where you learn that Pope Francis, and I didn't know this about him personally, so I found this really cool, and I assume that it's true because it's in the film, so I hope that it's true. But essentially there was a dictatorship that happened in the country that he was in when he was a priest, when he was younger, and they basically were killing all the priests who dissented against this new dictatorship. So he tried to play along so that way he could save people and get people out of the country and try to help people as best that he could. But at the same time, that caused him some grief because the people who he was working with felt like he was being a traitor and not helping the people that he should, and he was more working with the people that he shouldn't. I understand the complex nuances of that because, again, sometimes you have to work within the system to try to affect the change that you want to do. And ultimately, it kind of speaks to where Francis got, and not just by the end of the film, but in real life, in the Pope, the papacy, where he's trying to make sure that the church can still survive longer on, so that way it can still do the good work that it can do. So I think that's a really great way to kind of bring that into the story. I found that very fascinating. I also love that this movie was kind of a buddy situation between, at first they didn't like each other, but they build to like each other. And the reason that is because Pope Benedict is kind of lonely, and he speaks about that because he can't hear God's voice anymore. And it's also part of the reason why he resigns the papacy. So all that kind of lends itself into he needs a buddy, and the buddy ends up being Pope Francis. And the reason that is because Francis is just a good guy who wants to care for people, and that's what makes him a good pope, and that's what makes you want to root for him. I think it's fantastic. I think it's really well done in that way. One scene that's really phenomenal, and it's amazing because it's like a post-credit scene. You wouldn't there like an end credit scene, if you will. What's amazing about it is that it's this end credit scene in the two popes, and you wouldn't expect it. So really cool work on Netflix to put that in there. But what happens is it's Pope Benedict comes back to hang out with Pope Francis to watch the World Cup. And earlier in the film, they talked about, Pope Benedict talked about, I don't get the World Cup, and Pope Francis says, oh, it's like this, you can feel the excitement when you're watching. So they bring them in to watch the World Cup because it's Germany versus South America. Oh God, what's the country? Brazil? I can't remember, forgive me. But anyway, so they're watching the World Cup, and it's fantastic because they're drinking some beers, they're relaxing. It's this amazing kind of buddy situation between the two popes, and it's fascinating to watch that because as an outsider, when you look at a pope or you look at somebody of authority, it's weird, they have such authority, they're such, put out in such a public persona. So when you get to see them let their guard down, it's fascinating. It's like, seeing, and it's fascinating. There was also another good scene within the film, and it speaks to Pope Francis's, just kind of soft nature and kind of humorous style. 1 second before that is that he's whistling a tune very early on in the film, and Pope Benedict goes, oh, what tune are you whistling? Or what hymn are you whistling? And he goes, oh, I'm whistling Dancing Queen by ABBA, which is awesome. Francis he's a real person, and that's what's great. It's conveyed in this movie. So one of my kind of more interesting favorite scenes later on in the film was where Pope Francis is hanging out with Pope Benedict. They're saying their goodbyes from the Vatican, and Pope Francis teaches Pope Benedict how to tango per his native country. So I found that it was fascinating because it was kind of awkward, but it was funny and it was charming. And it was just really well done by Jonathan Pryce and Anthony Hopkins. Really fantastic work. There is some knocks, I will say, on the film. Again, it is very religious. It is to some extent political, and that might not be everybody's cup of tea. But also, I think this is kind of saying, I think it's very clear that Christianity is, at least according to Pope Francis, is about helping people and taking care of people, regardless of what you think of where they came from or what you think they did. He has this great line in the movie where, when no one is to blame, everyone is to blame, is the line that he says. When everyone feels that no one is to blame, everyone is to blame. I think it's a great line within the film, and I think it just speaks to, he talks about the world as it is right now, and it's just very in a cause of disruption for anger's sake at each other. So it's fascinating, that they cover that. Some things that did not work for me, and it's little things where, like, there's this one scene, and I don't know if it's because they filmed it outside and filmed it live and they didn't have any other audio for it or couldn't pull the audio out, or Netflix, I don't know what happened, but there's a scene between Benedict and Francis, and it's a good scene because any scene that they're together, it's fantastic, but there's this like bug in the background making this wicked high-pitched annoying noise that I literally almost had to turn off the movie because it was too much to handle. And then later on in the film you get a similar thing where young Pope Francis is, and he's not Pope yet obviously, but young Francis is at mass and giving his sermon, and there's like this tick 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 noise that going on the whole time for like a good 3 minutes, and it's I almost had to turn off the movie. So I don't know what the hell that was about, and Netflix should really look out for. I mean, who let that go through? I don't understand how that's even possible. So little semantics like that, and again, this movie might be too political and too religious for some people. I found this movie to be really fascinating. I found it to be a good look in on not just the changes over when the popes, change, and when all the bishops and cardinals kind of vote for a new pope. I don't know if it's all the bishops or cardinals. I don't know all the rules. But I find it fascinating that kind of gave us a look in and a peek into that window, but also like a transitioning of popes, from a resignation, which is kind of uncommon. It was just a really cool kind of insight to their world and kind of this area, and I found it fascinating. Really decent film. Again, it's something to stream on Netflix. It's not like you got to go to a theater, so if you're looking for something to watch on a late night, go ahead, put in The Two Popes. It's really great acting performances, and that's what I think is really enjoyable. I think Netflix is really knocking it out of the park with acting performances, not just in this movie, but also in Marriage Story. Laura Dern, Adam Driver, Scarlett Johansson, phenomenal acting performances over there, phenomenal acting performances over here. I gotta watch The Irishman still, probably phenomenal acting performances in that, because it's also nominated for a lot of Oscars, so who knows. Anyway, what are your thoughts? Go ahead, comment down below. Are you, is religion and politics kind of not your thing, or is this something that, I want to check it out? Go ahead, comment down below. Don't forget to hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, ring the bell to the top, that way you don't miss any of my new content. As always, thank you for watching. We'll see you soon.